Today, I want to challenge an idea that many of us have quietly accepted. Somewhere along the way, many people begin living as though the best chapters of life are already behind them. They stop trying new things. They become a little less curious, less adventurous, and a little less willing to do what they are still capable of doing. But what if we've got it backward? If you reach 60 and live to 90, you still have roughly 1/3 of your life ahead of you. That isn't the closing paragraph, my friends. That's an entire chapter. Today, we'll explore why so many people begin winding down psychologically and physically long before they have to, what science tells us about staying mentally and physically engaged, and one simple way to keep expanding your life instead of quietly shrinking it. This is a Karen Shaw podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Shaw. Let's get started. Many of us live in a world designed to make life easier. We can hire someone to do the yard work or clean our homes, have groceries delivered, and order almost anything with a few taps on a screen. None of these conveniences are bad, but if we're not paying attention, convenience can quietly replace engagement. For much of human history, staying active wasn't something people had to schedule. Daily life required it. People walked, carried things, worked with their hands, tended their homes and property, and remained physically involved in the everyday work of family and community. For many of us today, life is very different, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we give up our conveniences. But when life no longer requires as much from us, something changes. We may no longer have to rush out the door, solve as many daily problems, keep up with children, or stay connected simply because our schedule demands it. And when those pressures begin to fall away, staying engaged no longer happens automatically. We have to become more intentional about this. I have a large extended family, so I'm fortunate to receive plenty of invitations, concerts, family gatherings, outings, and all sorts of opportunities to get out and participate. And I'll tell you the truth, sometimes I don't particularly feel like going. Staying home sounds pretty good, but I've learned to pay attention to that first inclination to say no. What am I saying no to? Am I saying no because of a genuine limitation, or because I've gotten used to choosing what is easier? Because when I say no to the invitation, I may also be saying no to seeing someone I love, experiencing something new, having a great conversation, laughing, and sharing meaningful moments. So most of the time, I go. And almost invariably, I'm glad I did. I see people I love, I laugh, I hear something new, I experience something I wouldn't have experienced sitting at home. Most importantly, I remain engaged with the world around me. And I do that intentionally, not because I think we should be busy every minute of our lives. Rest matters, quiet matters, and there are legitimate limitations. But there is a difference between choosing not to do something and gradually getting into the habit of not doing things. And that difference is worth paying attention to, because there is a big difference between respecting our limitations and unnecessarily creating new ones. And that means we need to be willing to ask ourselves a few honest questions. Am I making my decisions based on what is generally right for me, or simply on what feels easier, more familiar, or less demanding? Am I turning down invitations because there is a real reason not to go, or because staying home has simply become easier and more familiar? From the outside, these may seem like small choices, but each time we step away from an opportunity to engage with life, it matters. And over time, those small choices can begin to shape how large or how small our world becomes. A comfortable life is a gift. A shrinking life is not. And sometimes the difference between the two begins with simply paying attention. Now, this isn't just a nice idea about staying young at heart. Research shows that what we expect of ourselves as we age can influence how we live. Yale psychologist and epidemiologist Becca Levy has spent decades studying how our beliefs about aging affect us. Her work suggests that we begin absorbing ideas about aging long before we are old. We hear what older people are supposed to be like. We see how they are portrayed. We hear the jokes. We notice the expectations. Then something interesting happens. Surprise! Eventually we become the older person, and those stories and expectations about aging can become part of how we see ourselves. We may begin thinking, people my age don't do that, or I'm probably too old for this, without ever stopping to ask whether it is actually true. And that matters because our expectations can influence our behavior. In one long-term study of 660 adults over age 50, Levy and her colleagues found that people who had more positive perceptions of their own aging lived longer than those with more negative perceptions, even after the researchers accounted for things like age, gender, socioeconomic status, loneliness, and physical functioning. That does not mean positive thinking magically adds years to your life, but it does tell us that the way we think about aging. More recent research continues to challenge the idea that later life is simply one long period of decline. In a large study reported by Yale in 2026, researchers found that nearly half of adults 65 and older showed improvement over time in physical function, cognitive function, or both. People who viewed the later years in life more positively were more likely to show improvement. I think that is worth thinking about. Growing older certainly brings change, but change and decline are not the same thing. There's also research on something psychologists call activity restriction. That simply means giving up activities that are important or enjoyable to us. Sometimes there's a very good reason. Our health changes, an injury occurs, something we once did is no longer safe or realistic. But what researchers have also found is that when people can no longer do something they value, finding a satisfying replacement matters. Maybe you can no longer run, but you can walk. Maybe you can't maintain the large garden you once had, but you can grow something smaller. Maybe one kind of travel is no longer realistic, but there are still places nearby you've never explored. In other words, adapting matters. If you are still doing many of the things you did at 30 or 40, wonderful. Keep doing them. But in the areas where something is no longer possible, practical, or a good fit for your life, the goal is not to simply stop. The goal is to adapt and keep finding ways to stay engaged. And who decided that retirement was supposed to mean slowing down anyway? Retirement means leaving a particular job or career. It does not have to mean retiring from movement, challenge, contribution, or an active life. In fact, historically, the idea of retirement as a long period of leisure is relatively new. For generations, many people continued working and contributing for as long as they were able. As pensions and Social Security made retirement financially possible for more people, retirement gradually became a distinct stage of life. That wasn't a normal social achievement, but somewhere along the way, we also began attaching another idea to it. Now you slow down. And I think we should question that. Perhaps retirement is better understood as moving from one form of activity into another. You may leave the workplace and suddenly have time to travel, volunteer, help with grandchildren, serve your community, or finally pursue an interest that spent 30 years waiting in the wings. The structure changes, the activity does not have to disappear. That is especially important because researchers who followed more than 500 people as they moved into retirement found that the proportion of time they spent being active decreased, particularly moderate to vigorous physical activity. Now think about that for a moment. Nothing about retirement itself requires the body to move less. But work may have required us to walk across a building, climb stairs, stand, carry things, leave the house, or simply move through the day. When that structure disappears, some of that movement can disappear unless we deliberately replace it. And that matters. Physical inactivity is not an inevitable part of growing older. And it is certainly not something health experts recommend. Quite the opposite. The message from the science is to keep moving, keep using our strength, and keep challenging our bodies within our individual abilities. And there are certainly no recommendations that say, you've reached retirement age, start taking it easy. So perhaps instead of thinking, I'm retired, oh, I can finally slow down, the better question is, what am I going to do with all of this life I just got back? Retirement can be an ending, but it can also be a transition from one form of engagement to another. And here's something I found rather surprising. The basic physical activity recommendations for adults over 65 are very similar to those for younger adults. The World Health Organization recommends 150 to 300 minutes of moderate aerobic activity each week, or the equivalent amount of vigorous activity for adults 65 and older. Now that is essentially the same aerobic recommendation given to adults 18 to 64. Older adults are also encouraged to continue strengthening the major muscle groups with additional attention to balance and functional strength. In other words, the message is not you're older now, so expect to do less. Quite the opposite. When we are able, we are still being asked to move, strengthen, challenge our bodies, and stay active. And because movement may no longer be built into our lives the way it once was, we may have to become even more intentional about making sure it happens. I know that may not be what everyone wants to hear, but most of us know the old saying, what you don't use, you lose. And there is real physiology behind that idea. If we want to maintain our strength, mobility, balance, and ability to keep doing the things we enjoy, we have to continue giving our bodies reasons to maintain those abilities. This does not mean ignoring pain, illness, injury, or genuine limitations. We work within our own abilities. And if you are living with limitations, I would encourage you to stay curious about what may still be possible. Sometimes the answer really is, I can't do that anymore. And that deserves to be respected. But sometimes there may be another way. Maybe physical therapy can help restore some strength or confidence. Maybe an activity can be adapted. Maybe a shorter outing is possible when a longer one is not. Maybe there's something you haven't tried because you assumed it was no longer available to you. The point is not to question every limitation. It is simply to remain curious. Instead of stopping at, I can't, perhaps we can sometimes ask, is there any part of this I still can do? Is there another way? Is there something that might help? Sometimes there won't be. Sometimes wisdom means accepting that something has changed and letting go of what no longer fits our lives. That can be difficult. But even there, we still have choices. We can appreciate what we can do now, whatever that looks like. We can be grateful for the strength we have, the people who remain in our lives, the opportunities still available to us, and the ways we can continue to participate, contribute, learn, and grow. Gratitude does not require us to pretend that loss is easy or that every circumstance is good. It helps us notice what is still here. And perhaps that is where some of the wisdom of later life resides. We learn when to push a little. We learn when to adapt. We learn when to let go. Because no matter where we are or what our circumstances may be, the invitation to grow does not disappear. Growth may look different in adversity. It may be quieter. It may require courage, patience, acceptance, or a completely different path than the one we imagined. But we are still becoming. That never changes. So the question now becomes, where in your own life might you be winding down before you need to? Sometime this week, take a few minutes and ask yourself one question. Where has my life become smaller than it needs to be? Maybe it is physical. You've stopped doing something because it is easier to let someone else do it. Maybe it is social. You've begun saying no more often because staying home is more comfortable. Maybe it is mental. There's something you've wanted to do, but somewhere along the way you decided you were too old, too tired, or too far along in life to begin. And of course, it could be something completely different. This is your life to think about. The point is not to criticize, but to notice. Then ask yourself that one question. Is this a genuine limitation, or has it simply become a habit? If it is a genuine limitation, respect it, adapt. But if it is a habit, a comfort issue, or an assumption about what someone your age should or should not be doing, consider moving in the other direction by choosing one small thing. Accept an invitation you might normally decline. Take the walk, call someone, learn something new, go somewhere you've never been. Try something that makes you just a little curious. Do something for yourself that you have gradually allowed someone else to do. It does not need to be impressive. This is not about proving anything. It is about reminding yourself that you are still participating in your own life. Then pay attention to how you feel afterward. Did you learn something? Did you enjoy the experience? Did you feel stronger? Did you connect with someone or discover that you were more capable than you had assumed? That is how we begin pushing back against winding down, not with some enormous reinvention of our lives, with small decisions that say, I'm still here, I'm still curious, I'm still growing. And let's face it, everybody, growing older is real. Our bodies change, our circumstances change, our priorities change. But growing older does not require us to gradually disappear from the world around us. We can adapt without disappearing. We can slow our pace without shrinking our world. And we can keep learning and connecting and experiencing something new for as long as life gives us the opportunity. So this week, notice where you may have quietly begun winding down, and then choose one small way to move your life forward again. Don't let your future become smaller than it has to be. If this episode helped you look at retirement in a different light, I hope you will take a moment to like and subscribe to the Karen Shaw Podcast. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, please share this episode with them. Sometimes a small shift in perspective can open a door we had quietly closed. This is the Karen Shaw Podcast, where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Shaw. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.